Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Business Bourbon and Cigars podcast. I'm your host, Scott Joseph, and today we're going to dive deep into a topic that's essential for anyone who wants to captivate an audience, drive business growth, and leave a lasting impression. We're talking about the art of storytelling, specifically through PowerPoint. And you've probably seen countless presentations, nothing more than bullet points, just all kinds of copy thrown up on a slide deck. A well-crafted PowerPoint design could be a game changer for your business, especially your sales team. And I speak from experience on this in terms of being a business owner who sometimes looks at our PowerPoints or our slide deck for our sales teams, and I just shake my head with no answer in sight until we run into someone like Emily. So today our guest, Emily Schneider, she's a true expert when it comes to visual storytelling and PowerPoint design. She spent nearly 2 decades mastering the art or the craft of transforming, and to me, this is the key, complex content into a captivating visual story that resonates with your audience. How many of us sit there and say all our products or our services that we provide, it's too complicated to just, I got to say this on the slide. I got to say this on the slide. I got to say this. She takes all that complexity, makes it simple, more importantly, have it tell a story. In this episode, Emily's going to share her journey, insights, more importantly for all of you, probably actionable tips that you can integrate immediately on how you can create presentations that don't just inform, but they inspire. So whether you're pitching a new idea, presenting to a board, as I said earlier, your sales team, pitching your product or service, or you're simply looking to improve your communication skills, this episode is for you. Before we dive in, remember our sponsor, Me Plus Ultra, incredible mastermind group. That's where they're breaking business barriers. I want you to subscribe to Me Plus Ultra at meplusultra.com and our Me Plus Ultra network. That's our YouTube channel. That way you never miss an episode filled with valuable insights like the ones that you're going to hear today. So with nothing further to do, welcome Emily to Business Bourbon and Cigars.
Oh, thanks so much, Scott. What a pleasure to be here. Awesome intro. Thanks for all that.
Oh, thank you. The audience never sees it, but sometimes I got to re-record those because I butcher them, or I'm like, I didn't make the point I wanted to make.
But you did a great job.
Well, I really, this one hits home for me in a lot of ways because if I had to say what's the one passion I have in any business, it would be sales. And anymore, I would 90% of our sales are done virtually, whether it's on Zoom or what have you. So the deck is very important because we have to visualize what's going on, to our prospect or to our client. And man, I've went through periods where I just know ours was horrible. And what we were saying was good, but it didn't align. There was no story. It didn't motivate. It didn't inspire. So I'm excited to hear all the things you've got for us today. Start us off sharing a little bit about your journey. How did you first get into PowerPoint design? And more importantly, really than that, is the visual storytelling.
Yeah, totally. Well, it kind of briefly started when I was 16 and I designed my first thing. It was my Sweet 16 invitation. It was questionable fonts, quirky colors. Like it was really bad. There's been great growth since then. Let's say that. But what I remember most about that first design was the way that that people responded and engaged, and the way that it made them feel. And I have now learned as an adult that I have this curiosity and this empathy towards helping people shine. And so that is what the power of design has sort of brought to my world, where I have have landed in terms of niching myself as a PowerPoint or a visual storyteller with a mastery in PowerPoint, right, really was an evolution through traditional marketing and agents and advertising agencies. I started as a junior designer. I did go to art school. I studied visual communications there. But what I learned and what I really was paid attention to when I was younger was, in terms of shopper marketing, it's all about understanding consumer behavior, where somebody is at a point of purchase, what they're feeling, what you want them to do, right? You don't have a lot of time. So I learned how to design pieces and how to connect with audiences that way. And it was great. But then I started understanding that, okay, I could design something, but it had to be sold into a business. Somebody had to believe it. And then usually they had to go up the chain of their command, right, to get it approved. And when I started being able to be part of those presentations, not only sitting in the room and listening, but then designing them, setting them up, helping to build that story, I was in love. I loved the power of having a platform that can do that can connect us, that can guide somebody along to make the decision you want. And I loved how I could bring my skill set of my strategic mind, my curiosity, my ability to help somebody else feel more confident in what they're doing to life. And I sort of I've always tapped into the things that made me happy. And about a year ago, I was a general freelance designer for the past 5 years. I've been on my own. And a year ago, I just was like, this is the work I love doing. I just got excited when those kind of projects came in. And I kind of raised my hand or did some research, found that there's a presentation community out there. I now have a presentation design coach who is really helping me to figure out that when you niche yourself, you actually broaden your horizon. Yep. And the need for what I do is not just in this marketing agency world. To your point, I think sales teams are benefit so much by having a stronger story. And so I have loved this journey to get where I'm at, to really bring my skill set and my magic to others.
Was there some type of, like, I guess, project that you were working on where you saw a significant impact? I guess what I'm looking for, where was the turning point that made you realize, I guess, the true power in a well-designed, I'll call it a pitch deck, PowerPoint, however we want to call it, right? What was that aha moment like where you're like, holy crap, look what this just did?
I don't remember, so I could say, that's a great question. Cause I feel like there's seasons, but before I left the agency world and went out on my own, I had been connected with a group of data scientists who were using GPS technology to help understand consumer behavior that they would inform marketing companies so that they could better target their ideal audience in a situation, right? Thinking about somebody who's always going to Starbucks, but there's a Dunkin' Donuts right in front. Anyway, they understand that there's this cycle. Oh, if we give them a free bagel, maybe they'll come. So now you've got to market a promotion, right? So I connected with these data scientists. These guys probably, I think, are similar to some of the sales people maybe you work with. They don't know. They're data scientists. These guys are in numbers. They're in the back end. So they're trying to sell their business. They're a startup. I got connected with them. And within the first couple of months, their just interest in getting these discovery calls and their investor connections just started to multiply so much. And it became such a beautiful relationship. They actually were the ones that got me out of agency and hired me full time for a bit. Because again, they understood I could translate their complex information to help somebody else understand what their product was, what they did, and how they could, what the value was for that client in a very simple way. And it turned a really complex business model into a really easy conversation piece. And that's the goal.
I'd love to know. That what you just said there, talking about taking the very complex stuff, is going to lead me to the next question. But before I ask that, I'd love to know the percentage of entrepreneurs who got their start because they had a client who kind of said, hey, why don't you consider doing something like this? And then they get kind of almost like a jump start, right? Gosh, I talked to so many people where that's happening. And I think that speaks volumes to you because you have strong relationships with, obviously with people that you're working with. But let's get back to this storytelling and this complex. I promise you, every business owner, any leader, anybody running a sales team, they're sitting back and they're saying, no, this, I hear you, but I've got a very complex stuff. I've got a commodity. I've got all the excuses that'll come from this. How do you take that complex stuff? How do you tell a story to where it really inspires and has an impact?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm a big collaborator, right? I am not the expert in those businesses. Part of my process is always about collaboration. But what I'll say is, and maybe you can, this is my theory or what I've learned, but as a sales master, I feel like, sales presentations are just a one-on-one conversation. And so when you can simplify what you're saying, you can connect with your audience. Not only do you build that trust, that credibility, and that authenticity, right? But you allow them to engage and then start to ask questions so that you can really drive them forward to where you want that conversation to be, if that makes sense. And so when you can simplify your story, build it out, I do help my clients understand that there's a sequence. And again, my sequence I know there's a lot of philosophies, but setting up the stage, right? Then going with the beginning, middle, and end. So you kind of you walk your audience through what you want them to do, really makes that powerful story. But the way I work directly with my clients is and I'm a very face-to-face person, so lots of Zooms too. We get on a call and they start walking me through and explaining to me what their story is, what each slide from the intention is, what the key takeaways are, and then overall what the presentation needs to do. It's just in my nature to simplify the complexity. That's how I see the world. I've always seen it in shapes and colors and spaces. And so when people start to talk to me, or when people will share that with me, I can read it and then I start doodling because I see things start to connect and move together. I can see how, this is the key point we need to take, or highlight, right? Whether it's copy, this should be a visual. Why don't we make this a chart? Why don't we, create tension when you're talking about the conflict, or the solution should be more open. It should feel, there should be some emotion that is involved. And so with design, with simplifying the story, with graphs, with data, and again, being very intentional with how much and what you put on a slide, you can really simplify the story. I think, again, we think over communication is actually going to help somebody, but we just create more confusion. So I am one to always challenge less is more. Simplicity, consistency, and intentionality. Those are like my buzzwords that I always am sharing and talking about.
I'm about to make your life very difficult with a couple very dumb questions. All right. Because I'm a very visual person and it's going to be difficult because we're on a podcast, right?
Mm-hmm,
and so, half of our audience might be on our YouTube channel or catching the video somewhere, whether it's on the website or whatever. But a lot of them are going to be just downloading the audio version. So now you need to somehow, for me, because I'm a visual person, help me understand. Let's say, I'm going to give you examples and talk to me about, let's say a lot of what I do, you had these data scientists. So I think that let's just go to that example. They got to talk about your data and here's what you can do with this data. How do you take that? And if you could describe what does like 2 or 3 key slides might look like that really start telling that story? Give me, if you can somehow
I get what
visualize
you're saying,
that for me.
Yeah. So I think it's like, I think it's like in general, right? It's the idea of like, let's say you're talking about a product and how it's growing, right? The potential investment and ROI that you can have. Well, what I would get is all of the data points, all of the back, right? All the history, and then the future forecasting. And people will just plug that in. And great, you have a beautiful bar chart you see the curve. But is all that information important? Do I need to know every single date? Do I need to know what every bar where it hits, right? It's those simple things. Do I stylize the graph so the colors are associated with trimesters or with certain products or with past and future projections? Do you only call out do I only show the data for a few months because that impact actually has more wow factor than showing the whole curve? Do you layer kind of information on, do you build it? Is it something that evolves as you're talking? So as your story and your voice you're leading, you're talking about, this is where we were, you show that part of the information. This is where we are today, show that part of the information, and this is where the future is. So it's really the simple things that when you can stylize them and create some strategy that aligns with your story, you can really help to cadence that and show that visual. Stylizing pie charts, using the same color. So if I'm talking again about a certain product in a bar chart and the trends that are happening, and now I'm going to talk about where the investment's going to go and how that's going to funnel into all of our products, right? Use the same color. Our brains naturally connect that information. Like you said, you're a visual person. We're 65% more likely to retain information when it's visually designed than when it's just copy. So when you can streamline and create consistencies with color, fonts, the way you treat and highlight something, you're going to automatically create that cadence across slides. Does that help?
So, a little bit. So a couple questions I think will clarify and help me just to make sure I think please. I got it. I just want to make sure.
I love it. I love this challenge.
So let's say I've got a deck and I'm showing, all right, here's our returns. Here's our average returns. You can expect this in the first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever it might be. And I'm showing percentages. You're saying horrible because you're using a visual thing, not horrible, but you're showing a visual thing where usually I should be doing some type of, I can make that more visual versus just putting the copy up there of the percentages. I should be demonstrating it, making it extremely visual, whether it's a chart, graph, whatever, then showing consistency in the colors by products or whatever it might be. And obviously those colors should, I would assume, align with my brand and fit our brand standards and identity. And then what I also got out of there is aligns with what any successful person would do as well. Let's just take a simple intro into a sales pitch. If I go into a sales pitch, I might have all kinds of accomplishments, but the only one that matters is the biggest one. All right. If I go into and say, I've accomplished this, and this is, in other words, I'm Scott Joseph. One of the things that you want to know about me is blank. And let's say it's this big thing. But if I continue to talk about all the other things I might have accomplished that are not as significant as that, all I've done is water down the big one, make it more confusing, and make someone think, wow, am I going to have to keep listening to all this? I lose the impression that I'm trying to make. Is that accurate?
Fair. I feel like I have two counterpoints or supports. Okay. So there is nothing wrong with designing your data. So meaning it doesn't have to be a chart. Visualization can come in typesetting things. I just did yesterday a summary or a case study for a client, and all they had was percentages, 91%, 270% increase, and 50%. We designed the slide, right, based on the look, and we just stylized those numbers. They had containers. They had their supporting copy under it. In one version, we had icons that were subtly behind them to articulate what it was about, travel agencies. So it was about, one had an airplane and another one had a raising bar icon, right? So we stylized them. And then another version, I did do the data where I showed that 91% in a pie chart, but it was behind the number because, again, what is an easier takeaway? Sometimes those charts are needed to compare them visually. And sometimes I just need that quick number and I don't need all the other information. So I think it's more about intentionally designing and highlighting what you want to say. Going back to this, to where you were finishing, which was about, if I want to make that one point, I can, and I add more, I water it down. I'm a big believer in simplicity, consistency, and intentionality. So when you set up your work and you look at each slide, there should be 1 to 2 key takeaways. There should be like 30 words at the most. So that automatically brings you, what is the most important thing I'm going to say? And what do I really need to say? Because I think what I find with my clients is once they start to realize, that I don't need that, they're like, I don't need that. Whether it just becomes voiceover, but like that point doesn't drive as much as these key things do, right? These 1 to 2 to 3 key points on a slide. But
let me ask you this question.
Sure.
If the whole point of, I got 10 slides and out of those 10, each slide's got one key, maybe two key points that have to be made and really pounded home. I've heard a couple different things on this. If you look at most decks, there's a logo on every deck. So I'm going to ask you, I mean, if I'm already presenting to them and let's say my logo's on the cover and maybe I finish with it just because I want to have some branding in there. By the time I get to slides 2 through 9, don't they already know who they're talking to? Do I need that logo on every slide? Is that even a distraction? I use logo is
totally. I think it's per case, to be honest. Some people are really that's really important to them, especially if they become leave behinds or things that they send ahead. However, I believe that your brand is more than just a logo. So when you can design your slides and they align to your brand, you don't need your logo on every slide. I also will sometimes use the logo as a marker. It might be the bullet point, depending what it is and if that's allowed, right? It might be a watermark in the background. It might be a holding shape. So you can streamline your brand to visually tell the story without it just being a logo. Is really important.
When we publish this episode, and you go to the Me Plus Ultra website and the show notes are in the description, all our bullet points are one of our icons.
Yeah. See?
To our logo. So So we
can set that up in PowerPoint. We can make that part of a template. So it's great. It makes it easy.
So you talked about, go ahead.
No. I think I was I'm creating my own story. So you lead this conversation. This isn't my podcast. I'll have you on mine and we can go there.
The more you go, the easier my job is. I like it. So what you touched on consistency, right? Mm-hmm. And so let's just go into that a little bit, right? What role does like visual consistency play in terms of the impact for a PowerPoint?
Yeah. Okay. So love that question. And again, I'm gonna hit home on this. 65% more likely to retain information when it's visually designed. The other thing that
what was that number
that we're living in, and 65% more likely to retain information when it's visually designed, 10 to 20% when it's just copy. That's huge.
Yeah, that is.
I just had this amazing conversation over the weekend with some friends that I used to work with in my agency days about attention economy. We are living in a world where we are used to things always changing, happening, and coming to us. And sound is now becoming muted, right? But if you think about it, like they're like brands should update their logos every 6 months just to be fresh. Because when you have the same thing over and over, you start to tune it out. And so I think that there is so much power in creating a visual consistency. It's not the exact same, but streamlining things through so that your brain automatically connects it and that story is beautifully laid out. I have younger kids. My 5-year-old cannot read, but she loves books because the power of a visual story, the power of picture books, and even comics are trending and are huge. I love reading comics these days too, right? Yeah. Because they allow you to see the story, to feel it, to understand what the focus is, where that tension is, where the drama is, right? Where the good points are, and you can do it at your own cadence, right? And by the end, you feel those emotions, you understand what the point is, and you've read a story, whether you've read a word or not, and that's the power of the visual story.
So I know you're big on tailoring, I guess, the presentation or the pitch to the audience. And I don't think I love taking this to sales because it's so easy I think first off, our audience, probably the number one reason they use a PowerPoint is I think in their sales teams. I don't think there's a salesperson, sales manager, or any owner of a company that wouldn't say, I want to be one-to-one to my clients or prospects. I totally believe, and I get the power of being relevant, extremely relevant. And that's probably the biggest benefit of tailoring, the presentation. But the challenge with that is a capacity issue, right? How in the heck am I supposed to tailor this to everything? So kind of walk us through two things. It's a two-part question. What's the process to make sure that we tailor it to the right audience, or tailor it to the audience so it's relevant? And then how do you have some tips or like shortcuts to where it's actually can be done without being such a time suck?
Yeah, so that's really interesting because you're going like to a different, you're approaching that as different than I think of it. Because when I think about tailoring, it's about, and your audience, it's about understanding who's in the room and how you're delivering that message, whether it's a webinar, whether it's in person, whether it's an email. Because when you know how you're delivering or what that medium is and who your audience specifically is, and understanding what they need to know, do, and feel. I use like the pyramid approach, right? So pending where they fall in that hierarchy, or, if you think about an organization, if they're at the top in the C-suites versus the bottom is your peers, as the triangle gets narrower, the less amount of detail is needed for them to understand or what they need, because again, they have their own story. So you don't necessarily have to craft it so like every page has their color or their logo, right? I do believe, and I'll work with clients and their client logo goes on a few slides, maybe. Again, pending what the story is, when you're trying to talk about what your partnership might look like, what this relationship would look like, you put that in there on the cover, on the back, sure. But in those main slides where you're really proving your point and what your offer is, and it's not about them, it's just showing your value to them. You don't need to tailor it, but you need to tailor it based on your audience, who they are, and what they need to know and do and feel. And that will allow you to craft a simpler presentation too.
I love this. And thank you for clarifying that difference, because my mind was going like each individual client. But you're so right on this, because I'm going to go, one of my businesses is J&L Marketing. So it's digital marketing agency.
Yep.
The people that I would talk to, the prospects, the potential clients, they're the business owner. And I got to tell you, if you go through a detailed like slide deck, it bores. First off, they don't even know what you're talking about, half of them. They just want the big picture. What's this going to end up doing for me? So if I'm hearing you right now, however, there's a lot of there are influencers within their business, the people they rely on to know the detail, to know the specifics of that digital marketing, to be able to accurately tell them, yeah, this is working, this is not, this company knows what they're talking about, this one doesn't. That person needs more detail, or you're not going to sell them. Because if I went to them with the same information that I went to the business owner, the guy that doesn't want to learn all that crap,
sure,
they're going to just think I'm full of it and just smoke and mirrors. They want the specifics and the detail. So if I'm hearing you right, the capacity issue that I mentioned isn't that hard, because really it's less about tailoring it to each individual and more about the different avatars I might have. Here's my business owner. Here's my guy in the weeds, the detail guy that's handling all their marketing. This is my deck for them. This is the deck for the owner. Here's the tough question then. What happens if my pitch, they're both in the room and I've got to pitch them both at the same time?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think that's a per case basis, right? That's where you kind of got to do your research and understand your audience and who is the key decision maker. I think there's a medium then. I think you set up some of the general stuff and then maybe you have a click through, or a lot of clients will build one version as a leave behind, right? So it has the more detail. But yeah, that's a hard one. But I think there's the opportunity. And again, it's when you're intentional and you're aware and you plan for it, you're going to have a conversation with people and everybody's going to interpret it differently. So if you can just bring them along, you keep it very visual, then the business owner who might not need to know all the details can stay engaged. And then if they tune out, guess what? You're going to bring them right back in with something really powerful on the next slide. So that's kind of natural of that process. Shameless plug, because you are a visual person. On my website, I do have a one pager that has my triangle and kind of helps break down a little bit, again, just in terms of seeing that as like how much detail and information. So it talks about understanding your audience, your story, the visual design, and the delivery. So there's some good quick tips to grab.
And that's at IamEmilySchneider.com, right? And
Yes.
we'll have that linked in our show. So if anybody, if you can't write that down, or Schneider is Schneider. Schneider. We'll have a link in the show notes in the description, so it makes it easy. You can go there, take your phone out, go to the show, and click on it. And you'll take it right there. But I will go to that. I'll take you up on that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So let me ask.
In my blog.
Let me ask.
Yep.
Let me. Sometimes it's easier because I want people to walk away, and I think you've already given them a lot in terms of what they can do to immediately improve. But sometimes it's also easy to improve by subtracting all the things we do wrong. So what are the top things that you see that, listen, if you're doing this, you need to stop this immediately?
Okay.
What
so
are those things?
So I have a really hard time focusing on negative. So I'm going to flip it and say, these are the things that you should do more of. So you do less of those. Simplicity, consistency, intentionality. Less is more on a slide. Put it all out there and then start to chip away. That was one of my favorite exercises when I was, earlier in my career is I like over designed everything. And then you start to pull things out. Do I still need it? Does it still make sense? Right. There's a famous quote that's like, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. It's that idea that less is really more, it's more powerful. So less on a slide. I'm happy with more slides. I believe that that is more visually engaging as well. Consistency. Keep treating things the same way. Don't throw in random colors. Don't use different fonts on every page. Headlines in the same spot. Really intentional, simple choices go a really long way when you're trying to elevate your visual story.
So if you're a business owner out there, obviously you want to look at your deck. In one way, you're going to know if you've got a successful deck is it visually appealing? But what are some of the other ways to measure? Is this the right deck? Did we do this? Did we design it right?
Oh, that's a really good question. I feel like, does it get you excited? Do you feel confident sharing the story? Are you able to use your presentation kind of as the background support for what you're saying? I believe that our universal truth is we all just want to connect with each other. And so when you can have an authentic conversation and share something, and you're not reading from a slide, and you feel confident and you're articulate, that's the power of a really strong presentation and getting the right story across. I cross my fingers because the other thing that I think, just to go back to your question about what are people not doing, or plan, prepare. Don't do it the night before. One of my things is it's a 10-day minimum. I mean, of course there's always rush projects. It's not like a hard no, but I need 10 days with a client from kickoff to final delivery at least, because that not only allows me time to process and to get it done, but it gives them time to really soak it in and really understand and what their story is and see how that evolution is from where they were to where they want to be. So preparing is something that is really important as well.
While you were saying that, it made me think, all right, let me go back to when I was I'm not the one making the pitches anymore. So I'm not doing that unless I'm in a corporate meeting or something like that. Then I'm doing it. But how many of us, we've all had slide decks where we're going through and so you said, does it motivate you? Do you get excited about it? And what made me think of this is, your overall deck might get you excited. You love it. It's great. But even within that, how many times have we been clicking through and then we get to one and we're like, we just skip over that one because in our gut, we know we've used it a few times. It doesn't hammer it home the way we thought it would initially. And so now we just skip over it, or we don't really use it, and we start we do whatever. That should be a sign to you. That's basically your intuition telling you that that's either that slide needs to be removed or fixed, right?
Yeah. I think that's totally right. Yeah. You got to listen to what feels right. If it's not good for you, it's really, right. It's all about that delivery. And so having, again, the right story visually laid out just reinforces how you can really deliver a strong,
Yeah, because
strong
congruency when we're talking and how it's critical, really. And if you're not congruent, it's hard to transfer, I guess, that feeling of emotion or whatever that feeling we're trying to do to the prospect, right? And get them just as excited about what we're selling as we are. So I touched on this briefly in the opener. There's a set of people out there. All right. We've all seen them. I don't allow PowerPoints in my meetings, and they've all got their reasons for this and that, right? I want the focus to be on what I'm saying and this and that. And you've touched on this a little bit by saying, people are, if it's visually appealing, 65% more likely to retain the information. I'm a very visual person. Somebody might tell me something and I kind of get it conceptually, but if I see it, it really hammers it home for me. What do you say to that audience that's like, I don't believe in PowerPoints? And the first thing I would ask you is why do you think there's a segment out there that say that? That's probably a better question.
Okay. Well, I was ready for the first question. Why do I think?
Well, go ahead.
Okay. I say, good luck. Great. And so let me know if you change your mind. I'm not here to convince people the power of it if they don't believe in it. But I do believe that there are so many business leaders who utilize PowerPoint and can say, I use it, but I don't love using it. It takes me too long and it's not doing what I know it can do. I need help. And that's where I come in. Yeah. For the people who say, I don't want it in my room, I don't need it. I can respect that. I get that. Right. We all learn differently. Again, I am an empathetic, curious person. And I believe that you need to, in order to connect with people, you have to meet them where they're at. And if you have a hard no on having visuals, I think you're my personal belief is you're limiting yourself to who your audience is or who's going to engage with you, because there is so much power in having the voice, and the visuals together. I mean, that's why movies are so good and they're still so powerful, because there's so much involved. And when we can tap into our emotional connection with things, there's so much neuroscience in how we relate, how we tell stories, how we work together. And so I think understanding that everybody's a little bit differently and having a variety of options is really going to be your best way to be successful in that presentation.
So I have a theory on this. I feel like for that segment of the people out there that just know on power, I think it's because basically they've been either exposed to and presented themselves with so many bad decks or so many bad ones, and they just know it didn't have the impact. So they blame it on that instead of the design of it and how you know what I mean? And so they're like,
totally.
Nah.
Keep the problem broken, just ignore it versus fixing it, right?
Correct. Throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And so, it's, you don't do that. Yeah. So are there situations though, where you're like, listen, PowerPoints, yes, there are a couple situations where I don't think you should use them on these type of stuff.
I mean, I don't have client conversations like that, but I will say, I don't think you need this much information. I think we can put it in one succinct slide. I think it can be a leave behind. It could be a one pager. I've had clients who have had presentations and I'm like, this is just an email. I mean, we'll design it in PowerPoint, because the other reason I love PowerPoint, to be honest, coming from a creative person or the creative world, and Adobe was like everything I knew. It's so universal that anybody can take it and edit it, can change it, can save it out differently. It allows me as a creative not to be so finicky with periods and letter capping. That allows the owner, the presenter, to really own that. And so I think that that's where I'm at. So
how do you
sort
know
of off tangent, but yeah.
Yeah. So if I go back to what you said, each slide wants to make one very impactful point, right? Or two at the most. How do you make sure the visuals don't overpower that?
It's a balance of it's finding a really strong balance. I mean, I think that's just for me. It's It's how I see the world. It's how I see things. It's using imagery, whether it should be subtle, whether it should be cropped, be more dynamic in how you're putting something on a slide so that you can still have a really key point. Again, it also goes to writing headlines that are treated like newspaper headlines. They're not paragraphs. Even your bullet points need to be short.
Yes.
Nobody remembers a lot. They remember a few things. So if I'm going to have a whole sentence and I bold 3 words, do I need the whole sentence? Or can I just have those 3 things? Because again, we remember short, pithy things.
Great point. I want to make sure, I want to get back a little bit to this storytelling. We've focused a lot on design. And so it's one thing to have good design, right? I get that. And maybe I need clarification from you. I need to be taught this a little bit. I picture, all right, design, I'm picturing colors, shapes, how we use them, how we're using fonts, and how all that type of stuff, graphic design. But storytelling to me, I don't know, it's something more that I see and I feel. And so, in other words, I should be able to look at this, and I'm hearing you talk, you're pitching or communicating whatever message you want, and the deck has to do it, but the deck needs to make me somehow emotionally, it needs to change it needs to support whatever's being said in my mind and elevate my state, right? Needs to take me from here to here, up notches, level me up. So how do you do that visually how do you do it visually to tell a story? And maybe I'm making this too complicated.
No, it's totally right. So like, again, I focus on the visual aspect to bring the story to life. I think, again, I'm going to go back to the idea of a picture book or a comic book, right? When you can have a visual and you can focus on something and your brain can connect what you're showing to what is being said, that is the visual story. That is the connection. That's the sweet spot. And so it's highlighting the right things along the way. So it comes to, and that's where my clients come to me with a story pretty much baked. I'll help refine it, but I don't write it because I need to understand what they want to say. And then we kind of discuss, okay, this is the important stuff. This is who we're talking to. This is our product. We should show it in a really amazing way. It should be really powerful, right? Those kind of things are important. So it's understanding what you want to happen and then aligning that visual with the cadence of how it's being shared. Does that answer your question?
How has AI helped, or I don't know how involved you use with it, but how is that impacting what you do?
I love it. Except for, I will say my
it's got to make your job easier.
It helps. It helps with content. I don't use it for visuals. I'll use it for, I think in the same way, it's a tool that is, we have to have that human connection and that human understanding. And an AI presentation is never going to focus on what your story is focused on, but it can speed up some processes. It can help me say, I need to ideate something that's about this. Give me some words or right? It helps my brainstorming process.
That's what I love about it. I love it. It's like gets me started. It's like,
yes,
that's good. I love that direction. Let me go there. Yeah.
And as somebody who, again, is very visual, like writing is not my forte, but it's really important in helping my clients streamline their information or also just communication. And again, I am a visual person. And as an entrepreneur, there's so much connection and writing. And so I love AI because it will simplify my words. I am a verbal processor. So when when it can help me, again, it gets to that less is more very quickly than hours for me. Last week, my kids and I were watching the Olympics, or we've been watching the Olympics, and I saw my first Copilot commercial for Microsoft. And we were watching it, and all of a sudden at the end, I was like, that's what I do, you guys. It was the first time my kids understood, like, what? And I was like, I make those presentations. And so my 8-year-old keeps throwing that back at me, like, Mom, is your job okay? Or like, can you do that? Can you do it in 5 minutes? And I was like, no, never. That's why, we're all about understanding brain science and just connecting with people that just the big thing I do as a mom. And so I'm like, nobody, because we always need humans to power these tools. And they are great resources. They are great strategies to make us do our work more efficiently, smarter, think a little differently. Let's push ourselves outside the box. But I don't believe they will ever overtake my job. And if they do, I'm sure by that point I'll have evolved and it will be different. So isn't that the beauty of kind of where we're going?
Well, I agree with you. I feel like the only employees that are going to get pushed out of a job because of AI are the ones that don't embrace it and use it, because there's no way they're going to be as efficient as the ones who do it. And part of the creativity is knowing how to prompt it. I mean, and how to set it up and train it. And I think, but yeah, you're not ever going to replace the creativity, because the AI almost needs that prompting.
Yeah.
It needs that starting point of what the heck what are we trying to accomplish here? And so, yeah.
The other thing I just heard about AI is that it's a couple years behind in terms of content and new and like relevancy, just in terms, if that makes sense. So we're always going to need humans, because it's never going to be where somebody has to program it, to your point. And so we're not going to be able to always catch it up. But again, it is a beautiful tool and it helps. And like, if it's something that makes me better and I learn with it, I'm a better writer now because I've been using ChatGPT than I was a year ago, for sure. Right? Like I can articulate what I do or who I connect with in such a better way because I've refined my message and had somebody that I can work with, especially as a solopreneur. It kind of becomes like a partner, right?
Yeah. Very nice. All right. So where can our listeners, and we touched on it earlier, but let's say someone just checked in here or skip forward a little bit. Where can our listeners connect with you to learn more about what your work, what you're doing?
Yeah. Awesome. I would love to send people to my website, which is IamEmilySchneider.com. I'm also super active on LinkedIn, so always happy to network and connect on there as well.
Very nice. Well, I want to thank you, Emily, for joining us today. Shared a lot of wealth of knowledge, your insights. And as I told you in the beginning, I've had so many decks where half the time when I'm speaking to you and I'm like, I know these business owners are out there thinking this. It's because that's how I've felt in certain stages, right? I've skipped over certain slides because I know they have no impact. I've done all these things. And so a lot of these questions where I was asking for more details because, all right, I get what you're saying, but I want to make sure I understand it so I can improve my stuff. So I'm hoping that gets passed on to our audience, because if you're out there, first off, I can tell you as a business owner that has to buy something, right? And if we're a business owner, we're all in that spot where we're at some point responsible for selling, but we're also responsible for buying things. There's nothing worse than listening to a pitch or a presentation and getting bored to death visually of what's going on. And they're just following through that. There is no story to it. It's not compelling. It's not inspiring. And man, if you are on, even if you're not in sales, and let's just say you're leading your organization as the owner or CEO, and you've got corporate meetings and different things, and there are times you need to rely on some type of visual behind you, man, you want your team to be inspired, right? You want them all rowing in the same direction and pumped up and really ready to take it on. So I love what you did, because I think it can help every single audience, everybody in our audience, with a variety of different situations. So for that, thank you. And for our listeners, I guess the Business Bourbon and Cigars team out there, nation, if you found today's episode as inspiring and informative as I did, I want you to make sure you connect with Emily. And once again, this will be in our show notes and descriptions, but you can the link will, but you can reach her at IamEmilySchneider.com. And as she said, she's active on LinkedIn as well. So whether you're preparing high stakes pitch deck, talking to your team, could be just everyday presentations, this is your expert right here. Go to her, figure it out. Do you offer any type of free consulting, like little 10-minute, 15-minute type thing if people reached out to you?
Oh yeah,
I hate
totally. I love meeting people. So
during your
like
time.
any kind of
Apologies.
discovery call. Yeah. Yeah, let's connect. Let's you tell me what your problem is and let's see how I can help. Or totally, always open to connect and help people. That's the
Yeah.
beauty of what I get to do. Yeah.
Beautiful. I love it.
Thanks for
All
asking.
right. So if you remember, guys, and remember, if you haven't done this already, subscribe to Me Plus Ultra Network on YouTube and visit us at meplusultra.com for more episodes filled with actionable advice, tips, and stories from industry leaders. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in business. It's about breaking business barriers. Cheers, everyone.